South. The problem is getting worse, not better."
Jackson Henson decided to speak up. It was an unfortunate decision. "I understand what you are saying, Mrs. Wells, Professor Du Bois," he said carefully. "But at the same time you are telling us these terrible stories of lynching, we have it on excellent authority that there is also an epidemic of white women being raped and molested by Negroes all over the South. I've seen the numbers. The crime of rape is at least as prevalent as the crime of lynching, is it not?"
"That simply isn't true, young man." Du Bois's voice was an ominous rumble. "I don't know where you're getting that insidious, completely inaccurate information."
Wells Barnett interrupted.
"Just this morning, Senator Morgan was telling people in the lobby of this hotel that he intends to repeal the anti-lynching laws now in effect."
Jackson Henson made a skeptical sound. "With all respect, Mrs. Wells, I seriously doubt Morgan can muster the votes to do such a thing." Then Du Bois,
"I disagree, young man. I disagree vehemently."
"That's enough," said the president. He got to his feet and paced the floor behind his desk. "I've heard enough of this squabbling. I am determined to get to the bottom of the problem, and I will." The president's flash of anger silenced everyone. They all stared at him dumbly, the combative Du Bois, the passionate Wells Barnett, the young and arrogant Henson. Now Roosevelt spoke, quietly and with purpose. "At this very moment, I have sent a personal envoy to the Deep South on a dangerous mission to investigate this entire question of lynching. He is a man I trust," Roosevelt continued, "a native of those parts. I have connected him with certain others who can show him the situation from all sides. I haven't told you his name because I'd rather this situation remain confidential until he's done his job. And then I will do whatever I deem necessary to remedy the tragic situation in the South." Ida Wells Barnett rose from the sofa.
"Thank you, Mr. President. I gladly tell anyone who asks that you are the best friend the Negro has had in this office since Mr. Lincoln."
Roosevelt shook her hand enthusiastically. Du Bois was forced by Mrs. Wells Barnett's action to rise from the sofa and offer his own hand.
"Thank you, Mr. President," he said.
"Yes, thank you, sir." The president shook his hand. "Let's hope we can make progress on this."
"I've been hoping for progress all my life,"
Du Bois said. Roosevelt kept the fixed smile on his face until the two were out of the room. Then he frowned and uttered an epithet. "Sir," said Henson. "You heard what I said." "Is there something I should do about this?" "Get a message to Abraham Cross. Tell him I want a report from him and Ben Corbett immediately, if not sooner." Chapter 49. I went down to Young's Hardware, the only such store in town, and bought myself a bicycle. Then I wheeled my purchase out into the hot sun. The machine was a beautiful silvery blue with pneumatic tires to smooth out the bumps and ruts of Eudora's dirt streets. I took my maiden voyage on my new machine out to the quarters to see Abraham Cross. On this day, Abraham and I did not head for the swamp. We rode his mules along the Jackson and Northern tracks, then turned east on the Union Church Road. This was fine open ground, vast flat fields that had been putting out prodigious quantities of cotton for generations. Every mile or so we encountered a clump of trees surrounding a fine old plantation house. These plantations had been the center of Eudora's wealth, the reason for its existence since the first slaves were brought in to clear the trees from these fields. "You don't mean they lynched somebody right out here in the open?" I said. "You stick with me," Abraham said, "and I'll show you things that'll make your fine blonde hair fall out." At that moment we were riding past River Oak, the McKenna family plantation. In the field to our left, about 30 Negro workers were bent over under the hot sun, dragging the cloth sacks that billowed out behind them as they moved down the row, picking cotton. We passed out of the morning heat into the shade, the portion of the road that curved close to the McKenna's stately home. On the front lawn, 2 adorable white children in a little pink-painted cart were driving a pony in circles. On the wide front veranda, I could see the children's mother observing their play and a small army of black servants hovering there. This was a vision of the Old South and the New South all wrapped into one. There, gleaming in the drive, was a handsome new motor car, brass fittings shining in the sun. And there, rushing across the yard in pursuit of a hen, was an ink-black woman with a red-dotted kerchief wrapped around her head. Abraham was careful to ride his mule a few feet behind mine to demonstrate his inferior position in the company of a white man. I turned in the saddle. "Where to?" "Just keep riding straight on ahead to that road beyond the trees," he said. "You don't think that lady's going to wonder what we're up to?" "She don't even see us," said Abraham. "She just happy to sit up on her porch and be rich." We passed once more out of the shade and turned our mules down the long line of trees flanking the McKenna's pecan orchard. Soon we arrived at another clump of trees shading an intersection with another dirt lane. The western side of this crossing formed a natural amphitheater, with a gigantic old black gum tree as its center. Beneath the tree, someone had built a little platform, like a stage. In a rough semicircle, several warped wooden benches were arranged, their whitewashed long faded. Obviously, they had been hauled out of some derelict church and placed here for spectators. "What is this, a camp revival?" I said. Abraham pointed up at a sturdy low branch of the gum tree. The branch extended directly over the little wooden stage, or rather, the stage had been built directly under the branch. 3 ropes were carefully knotted and hanging from the branch, 3 loops waiting for heads to be slipped in, waiting for someone to hang. "Good God," I said as I realized what I was seeing. "For the audience," Abraham said as he gestured around at the benches. "They come to watch the lynching, and they need a place to sit. Nothing worse than having to stand while you're waiting to watch 'em hang a nigger." That was the first time I'd heard Abraham use that word, and his eyes burned fiercely. I almost couldn't believe it. Across that fence was the McKenna's impeccable lawn, acres and acres of flawless mown grass. I could see beds of bright orange daylilies sculpted into the landscape from here to the big house. To one side of the stage, I noticed a low table with a small bench behind it. Maybe that was for shotguns and rifles to keep them out of the dirt. "What's that table for, Abraham?" He answered with a weak smile, "That's where they sell refreshments." Chapter 50. If I thought that obscene place was the worst abomination I was going to see, a serene amphitheater constructed for the pleasure of human beings torturing other human beings, I was wrong. Our journey was just beginning. We turned south along back roads until we were riding beside the fields of the Sawville plantation. I asked if they too had a theater for lynching. "I don't believe so," said Abraham. "Why bother building your own when there's such a nice one already established in your neighborhood?" We rode past the showy Greek Revival pile of the Sawville home, past miles of fields with colored folks in them picking cotton. After riding for most of an hour, we came to a long, low cotton barn with a tall silo for storing grain at one end. The place was neatly kept and obviously much in use. The doors at one end stood open, revealing deep rectangular bays stuffed to the ceiling with the first bales of the new crop. The most successful farmers used barns like this for storing their cotton from year to year, selling only as they needed cash or the price reached a profitable level. You telling me they've lynched somebody here? I'm afraid so. This was where Hiram Frazier got hung, and a couple more since. How on earth could you hang somebody in a barn this low? Looks like his feet would drag on the ground. He pointed to the end of the barn by the silo. The folks watch from in here, but they hang 'em inside the silo. Don't even need a tree. I shook my head. I thought of Jacob Gill and the pint he kept in his leather toolbox. I wished for a taste of that whiskey right now. Abraham led the mules to a slow, muddy stream where they drank. The old man knelt down, cupped some water in his hand, and drank too. It don't look like much, but it tastes all right, he said. I was thirsty, but decided I could wait. We climbed up on the mules. Abraham's animal groaned as he brought his full weight down on its back. I declare, I don't know who's in worse shape, Abraham said, this poor old mule or me. I smiled at him. There's one more place I need to show you, Ben, he said. Then I reckon we'll be ready to write an official report for Mr. President. As his mule started off, I saw Abraham wince in pain and try to hide it. He saw that I had noticed and forced a smile. Don't worry about me, Mr. Corbett, he said. I'm old, but I ain't even close to dying yet. But as he turned away and the smile dropped from his face like a mask, I realized that Abraham was a very old man, and probably a sick man as well. His face had the hidden desperation of someone hanging on for dear life. Or maybe just to make this report to the President. Chapter 51. I suppose Abraham was wise to save the worst for last. We rode the mules through a peach orchard south of the Chipley plantation, making a roundabout circle in the general direction of town. The air was heavy with the smell of rotting fruit. For some reason, no one was picking these peaches. At the end of the orchard, we emerged into a peaceful wooded glen. At the far side stood two huge old trees. From the fruit dotting the floor of the glen, I made out that these were black cherry trees. We had a nice specimen growing in back of the house the whole time I was growing up. From the tree on the right hung a black man. At least, I think it was a man. It was mostly unrecognizable. Flies buzzed around it. It had been there a while. I didn't want to go closer, but I found myself moving there as if my legs were doing all the thinking for my body. I could see that the man had been young. He was caked with blood, spit, snot, mud, and shit. His head was distended, swollen from the pressure of hanging. His lips were swollen too, like balloons about to pop. I began to gag and I turned away. I fell to one knee and heaved. Go ahead, Ben, Abraham said. It's good to be sick, to be able to get rid of it like that. I wish I could. I guess I'm just getting too used to seeing it. It's a bad thing to get used to. I took out my handkerchief and wiped the edges of my mouth. The wave of nausea was still sweeping over me. That's Jimmy Patton up there, he said. What happened to him?
He worked over at the gin for Mr. Pernod. Abraham